He was serious and committed to his job, but he could never escape the night shifts. At night, when a heavy silence dominated the hospital, strange sounds reached Alareza's ears. Sometimes these sounds came from the distant corridors and empty halls, as if they were an indistinct whisper from another time. One night, as Alireza was patrolling the corridors, he noticed a wheelchair that had been abandoned at the end of the hallway, slowly moving on its own. He approached and saw that there was no one behind it. He took a deep breath and told himself it was just an illusion, perhaps a breeze blowing through an open window. Days passed, and Alireza increasingly grappled with these strange phenomena. He sometimes saw shadows gliding around corners of the hospital, shadows that no light source could explain. These shadows occasionally took the form of human figures that seemed to have come from another world. Alireza kept telling himself that these were mere hallucinations caused by fatigue and work pressure. But one night, when he heard a soft, heartbreaking cry from the end of the corridor, he could no longer deny it. He moved towards the sound. The lights in the corridor dimmed slowly until everything was engulfed in darkness. All he could hear was his own heartbeat pounding in his chest. Suddenly, with a great spark, the lights flickered back on, and he found himself standing at the end of the hallway, near the room from where the crying sound had emanated. Alireza cautiously opened the door and entered. The room was empty, except for a bed with disheveled sheets. The crying had stopped, but now another sound, a deep and painful moan, echoed from under the bed. Alireza cautiously crept towards the bed and peeked underneath. There was nothing, just dust and shadows that seemed to be moving. He quickly stood up and moved towards the exit, but the moment he decided to leave the room, the door gently closed and locked itself. Alireza banged on the door and shouted, but no response came. He looked at the window that opened to the hospital courtyard, but the windows were firmly sealed with iron bars. At that moment, Alireza realized that the room he was in was not one he had seen before. The walls were covered with bizarre paintings, depicting scenes of torment and torture. And in the center of the room, there was a large mirror that did not reflect Alireza's image. Suddenly the crying started again, this time from within the mirror. Alireza drew closer to the mirror and saw that within it there was another world, a world where he was not a nurse, but a patient. 3 days after that mysterious night, Alireza had still not erased the image of the mirror portal from his mind. He was trying to dismiss the events of that night as a bad dream, but something inside him was tormenting him. He felt as if a part of him was still trapped in that room. While patrolling the hospital, a soft and unfamiliar sound from the end of the corridor reached his ears. It was coming from room 404, a room that had been vacant for a long time since the death of an unidentified man, and no one had set foot in it since. Alireza, driven by curiosity and trepidation, moved towards the room. When he reached the door, he took a deep breath and turned the handle. The door opened slowly, and a deeper and more sorrowful moan than before could be heard. Alireza entered cautiously and let his eyes adjust to the darkness. The room, which once housed a patient, now seemed empty and cold. But suddenly, something moved in the corner of the room. Alireza stared at that spot and saw a strange and terrifying creature standing there. A being with red eyes and a disproportionate body that seemed to be made of a dark, smoky substance. If you enjoyed it so far, please hit the subscribe button if you liked the video. Alireza, nearly paralyzed with fear, stepped back, and while taking deep breaths, looked for a way to escape. But the dark, smoky creature slowly moved towards him, and with each step it took, the moaning sounds grew louder. Ali Reza felt the air in the room getting colder and colder, and his breath appeared as mist in the air. At that moment, another sound, a voice coming from the walls, was heard. It was a whisper in an unintelligible and ancient language. Ali Reza looked at the walls and saw that the paintings of torment and torture had begun to move. The painted characters, once lifeless, now came to life and emerged from the walls. Ali Reza realized that this room was not an ordinary one, but a portal to a world where the usual rules did not apply. He remembered that this was the room where the unidentified man had died, and now his spirit was seeking vengeance. The dark, smoky creature approached Ali Reza and extended its hands towards him. Ali Reza, with nowhere left to run, looked at the large mirror in the center of the room and saw an image of himself appear in it. But the image he saw was not his own. It was the image of the unidentified man who had died in that room. Ali Reza touched the mirror and suddenly felt his hand passing through it. He was pulled into the mirror with fear and horror and found himself in a world where everything seemed reversed. He was in a room similar to the one he had come from, but everything was different. The colors were paler, the sounds distorted, and time seemed to move slowly. He searched for a way back to his own world, but with every step he took, he felt himself getting further and further away. Ali Reza remembered the unidentified man who had died in the room. Perhaps he had faced the same fate. Maybe he too had been looking for a way back and had ultimately given up hope. As Ali Reza wandered lost in this inverted world, he realized that there were other beings there, beings that seemed to be afraid of him and kept their distance. He understood that in this world, he was the strange and terrifying creature. Ali Reza came across another mirror, one that showed an image of the real hospital. He touched the mirror with all his might and felt himself being pulled back into his own world. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a room where everything seemed normal. But something had changed. Ali Reza realized that he could no longer see himself in mirrors. He quickly ran to the hospital control room and found that his name was not on the staff list. He ran outside and saw that the world continued, but as if he was no longer a part of it. Ali Reza, now feeling lost in a world that no longer recognized him, walked towards the setting sun. He looked up at the sky and smiled, a smile that accepted his new fate.